One of the things I do in my travel is I share my testimony. Now, by testimony, I usually mean how I became a Christian. I think I need to start sharing some other testimonies too about how God has worked in my life. But we're going to start with how I became a Christian. It's a story I've told many times to many people, and over the years I've managed to make it more entertaining. Slight embellishments. Not really, but it's how you say it. I'm going to try and give you a good, honest, accurate account today of why I'm a Christian. And part of it starts with my parents. It's real popular to say my parents were the reason I grew up all screwed up. I can't say that. My parents were so regular at church that they were often the first ones there and the last ones to leave, or it sure seemed like it. If they don't go, God can go. But it wasn't just going to church, they were involved in church. Very involved. Sunday school teachers. I remember one big church in Minneapolis when I was a kid. My mom was superintendent for the third graders, I think, or some grade school age or ages. It was a really big church. I think she had all third graders, and I think they had multiple classes. My dad was the president of the television choir in the 1960s. This church had their own TV show, and they had a special choir just for the TV show. They also sang Sunday night, and they had a different choir for Sunday mornings. And they were involved in everything. I remember one lady that was elderly and did not get around very well, and when she was able, my father and mother would stop by on our way to church, usually Sunday night. My dad would go up the stairs and escort her down because she wasn't too steady. I remember a blind couple that my mom went over and made pancakes for them. Pancakes are hard to make if you're blind. How do you know when they're done? Stick your hand in the middle of the dough and, oh, that's not done. Burn your fingers. Missed the pancake on that one. I found the hot plate. And I saw my parents doing great things. Later, my dad was, during the middle of the Jesus coffee house movements, my dad actually got one started in a small town in Wisconsin we lived in, and it was very popular with the teenagers and the young adults, and he made a huge difference in a lot of lives. And he showed up in my little league and pee-wee football and band and choir and whatnot. No, they weren't perfect, but a whole side closer than most. And yet with all that, it didn't take for me. I still say there was something wrong with me. I actually did try and find God during those times, to use a nice religious cliche, find God. Kind of funny because he's always been where he always is, and that's everywhere. But I couldn't establish a relationship with him. And I did a lot of bad things. I started doing dope and booze at a young age. I started stealing at a young age, became very good at it. Became violent at various points in my life. And if I got caught, I'd go to the altar and repent, and everyone would say, "Isn't that great?" And I'd keep play acting the duplicit life. Once in a while they overlapped, and it caused grief for me when somebody from one life found out about the other life, especially when the Christians or the good kids found out about the other half of my life. But most of them didn't say anything, so I was okay. And that was my life. Now, along the way, I got to Fort Carson in Colorado. I was in the Army. And I met my wife. Now, she came from a good Christian home, too. They attended church on Sunday, and, probably a more typical Christian home. They attended church, involved a little. Had 5 kids, probably didn't have time to get involved a lot. Whatever. And they raised their kids to be good Christian kids with good moral standards. But it didn't take long for her to come down to my level of life. And no doubt her mother is saying right now, "I told you so, I told you so." She was right. You put a big, strong guy up on a chair and have a little guy about half his size on the ground, and it's easier for the little guy to pull the big guy down than it is for the big guy to pull the little guy up. And I pulled her down to my level. And one day, after a particularly great party, my wife woke up in our bed, and she was laying in her own vomit. And she said, "I don't want to live this life anymore. I'm going back to church." I said, "Okay, I don't mind." And no, I didn't go with her, and she didn't nag too much, smart lady. But I was also, when I joined the Army, I became a chaplain's assistant. Chaplains actually like unbelievers because they don't have arguments of theology. They don't get a devout, radical assistant from a wrong denomination that's trying to convert everyone from one to the other and so forth. And one of my duties in Hawaii, I got caught loan sharking at Fort Carson. And they couldn't prove it, but they knew. And I'd made a lot of money, threw a lot of parties, broke some arms when people didn't pay on time. So the Army shipped me to Hawaii, where blacks and whites were a minority even combined, back in the 1970s especially. They could keep a better eye on me. And I went to the Big Island. I was on Oahu. The Army had a big training base over there that was totally unusable for anything else. We could drop napalm there, nobody cared. Nobody lived there. There were virtually no animals. No water whatsoever. Terrible, terrible place. And that sounds perfect for the Army. So we did our training up there. And the theater in 1975 had a theater at the base camp, which not everyone was staying at. But it showed one movie for the whole month. And this particular month, I forget, I think it was, let's see, it had to have been July. Well, no, it was August. It was August of 1975. And I know that's not important to you, but I was just trying to figure it out. The movie they were showing was Shampoo. Now, I've never seen it, but the guys that have tell me that it's okay once, but that's enough. Which means the only other entertainment they had was playing cards, or the chaplain had some movies. So the guys had come over for 1 or 2 nights of movies at the chapel. And we had a 16 millimeter projector. The Army allowed us to carry only 3 movies. And I was the projectionist, so I had to stay there. If you remember 16 millimeter cameras, they broke down a lot. So I couldn't walk away. Now the chaplain he chose 3 movies. The first was from Moody Bible Institute, and it was about the properties of water. The second, well, the other 2 were both about the Passion Week. One of them was focused on Luke 22, and it had the triumphal entry, and it had Judas betraying Jesus, and Jesus in the Last Supper, and Jesus being arrested, and Jesus on trial, and Jesus crucified and resurrected, and it ended. It was a good movie. I showed that one every other night. Every night there were 2 movies, and the first movie was the same every night. It was on this Moody Bible Institute movie on water. And water's got some rather unique properties, some of which are very, very unique. And like, water's the only substance on earth that when it gets heavy, when it becomes solid, it becomes lighter. If that weren't so, this would be an ice planet. Water would freeze, drop to the bottom, and ice tends to freeze other water. Sunlight can't penetrate. It'd pretty soon build up till there was ice everywhere. It'd be a dead planet. Surface adhesion lets the insects walk across the water. It mounds over glass. It went into all of that. And these unique properties that make water something that this planet cannot live without. It talked about the evaporation point and the boiling point and the melting point and the freezing point, and it just talked about a lot of that and how water stores heat or cold. If you live near an ocean or one of the Great Lakes, the air over land changes from hot to cold real fast when the sun goes down. But the water doesn't change as fast. And in the morning when the sun comes up, the air becomes hot again. The water doesn't change as fast. And that really set me to thinking. The third film that I showed every other night was on the Passion Week. But it kind of rushed through it, if you will. It did an okay job. But afterwards, it focused on the empty tomb. Now, on Resurrection Day, the disciples were like, who stole the body? What happened to his body? Did the angel get it right that he's not dead? And then that night, Jesus appeared to them. They knew what had happened then. Meanwhile, the Romans and the Jews are in separate places, but they're both wondering the same thing. Who stole the body? The Jews are saying, well, if the Romans stole the body, we can't do anything about it, but why don't they produce the body and make these Christians go away? And the Romans are saying, well, if we knew the Jews had the body, we could force them to turn it over, but I don't know why they don't just show it so that these stupid believers in this Jesus would go away. And it talked about how nobody had reason to steal the body. You know, and like with the Christians, these disciples were persecuted, often tortured and murdered, beheaded, hung, crucified, whatever. That isn't how you start a religion, people. You don't go out and say, okay, I'm going to pretend to be killed and then I'm going to rise from the dead and all my closest followers are they going to be persecuted the rest of their lives and be killed the same way I pretend, and that's how we're going to start a new religion. I don't think you're going to get any volunteers. That really bothered me. And I came home and it was on a Wednesday. And so that had to be August 27th. And I had this nagging voice in my head. It had been building all month. And Saturday night, or maybe it was the 28th. Anyway, Saturday night, I went to bed. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that Jesus tomb with the rock rolled to the side. And it was filled with water. Now, why didn't the water flow out? I don't know. It's my vision, leave it alone. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that. Now, my wife had told me years before, well, a year before, that if I was going to be her husband, I had to stop doing drugs. So I did. I stopped doing drugs. Well, except for my speed. I took 10 to 15, 20 of those every day. And that Sunday morning was no exception. I hadn't slept all night. I popped a bunch of speed, told my wife, I'm going to church with you. I don't remember exactly what she said, but it was probably something like, really? And I was probably a smart aleck and said, way to sell it, babe. But she kept her mouth shut and just took me to church with her. Now, I grew up in a church, so I knew what was going to happen. Everybody in that church came up to me. We've been praying for you. That's Christianese for we've been gossiping about you. And I knew that someone in that church was going to offer to study the Bible with me. Now, I knew a lot about the Bible, and I'm a pretty smart man. I figured I was smarter than I was. I figured I'd study the Bible with whoever volunteered and either confuse them or prove to them that the Bible was full of contradictions and lies, it couldn't be true, blah, blah, blah. And then I'd get this nagging out of my head, I could go back to living my life. But, the but comes later. See, I had a problem with Christians. I thought they were fools. I thought they were weak-minded. That their faith was a crutch. I thought they looked and sounded ignorant. And I had a pride issue. I didn't want to be like that. Bill Tolson came up to me after church. Now, Bill Tolson was a major in the United States Armed Forces, and he wasn't one of these domineering, shout in your face kind of guys. And then he said, why don't you and your wife come over to my house tomorrow night and we'll have dinner together and then we can study the Bible a little bit. I gotcha. So we went over there, and after dinner, Bill's wife says to my wife, Oh no, actually it was his wife said to Janet, she says, honey, why don't you and I clear the table and do the dishes while the men folk go and talk? They can go out in the living room. I knew I was being set up, and we get out in the living room, and Bill's got one of these film strip projectors. Now, if you're old enough to remember them, you're going to have to tell the young folk what they are. But basically, it's like slides on a film strip, and you crank it through, and each slide goes in front of the lens, and you don't leave it there too long or they'll burn up. And on the side you have a cassette recorder. You put the cassette in, and when the narrator's finished one slide, a little chime goes ding, and you advance the film. Ding, advance the film. Ding, advance the film. Now I quickly figured out two things. Number one, we started with Adam and Eve, and this is not going to be a one-night deal. Number two, that ding was going to drive me ding-a-ling, and it did. We got to the end, and Bill says, any questions? I said, no. He said, okay, I'll see you Sunday at church, and Monday you can come back here. All right. I had no intention of going. Saturday night, same vision, didn't sleep, took meth, went to church, went to Bill's house. We had a nice dinner, the ladies cleared the table, we went out, and I'm telling you, these film strips were designed to insult the intelligence of a third grader. And partway through that night, I told you I'm a pretty smart guy. Partway through that night, I figured out what they were. This was a 13-week Sunday school quarter Bible study. And I knew I was not going to sit through 13 of these. We got to the end, Bill said, any questions? I said, no. He said, all right. He said, I'll see you Sunday at church, and next week, why don't you let your wife stay home? We'll skip dinner, and we'll just meet here at 7 o'clock instead of 6, and we'll do the study. All right. Not going to do it, but all right. Saturday, saw the vision, didn't sleep. Sunday, took the drugs, went to church, went to Bill's house. Ding, 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 ding. Then went all the way through the month of September. That went all the way through the month of October. And I'm going every week, and I can't figure out why. We get to November 17th, 12 weeks. Any questions? No. I can't wait. Next week I'm done. I have endured. I'm going to stop doing this. And I knew it. Next week I was at church, and I was at Bill's house. He got to the end. And one of the reasons why I knew I was going to stop is because I had hurt a lot of people. I'd stolen from a lot of people. I'd physically hurt a lot of people. Now, my parents told me that God can forgive anyone. I'd heard it in church. But not me. You know, Paul says I was the chiefest of sinners. Well, I was probably one of his lieutenants. Nah, I know there've been a lot worse than me, but man, I was a lot worse than anybody else I knew. You don't understand some of the things I'd done. We get to the end, and Bill says, any questions? I said, is it too late for me? I didn't mean to say that, honest, but it was too late. I already threw it out there. And Bill smiled and shook his head and said, no, it's not too late. And remember, these film strips took about half an hour each. We started at 7 o'clock. Somewhere around 11 o'clock, Bill asked me if I wanted to become a Christian. I said yes. And now this was Church of Christ, and they believe you have to be baptized. I think other churches undervalue baptism. Church of Christ, I think, overdoes it, but they believe you have to be baptized to be saved. So he called my wife and said, "Do you want to meet us at the church? Your husband wants to be baptized tonight." And Bill and I drove over to the church, and lo and behold, Bill's wife had been calling a few other people, and we had a small party. And at 11:35 p.m. Hawaiian time, I was baptized on November 24th, 1975. I had swallowed my pride and asked God to forgive me. I never looked back from that day. I've screamed and yelled at God a few times. I actually cursed him one time. But even then I was telling him, "You may not care about me, but I'm still holding you to that promise of eternal life." I literally did that. But I can honestly say that God has remained faithful to me, and I've remained faithful to him. And I promise you this, I'll give you more stories about things God has done in my life. But I'm a Christian today because of the empty tomb. Where's his body? And because of water. And let me tell you, you look around in the world around you, and if you think all of this happened accidentally, I mean, I can't imagine the odds of all the variety of animals and plants and everything that had to come together just right. I mean, to me, that'd be like winning the lottery 52 weeks in a row, buying only one ticket. And it'd still be more impossible than that. I can't imagine how impossible all this would be without God.